Welcome to the SpiritWoke Podcast, podcasting from the beautiful city of Stillwater, the birthplace of Minnesota. Are you going through a spiritual awakening? Do you wish to learn more about continued spiritual growth and want to meet others who are on a similar journey? We hope that this podcast and its community can be a meaningful resource for you. The SpiritWoke Podcast welcomes special guests from around the globe who share personal stories of their awakening journey, along with details of spiritual abilities they've developed along the way. So buckle up and get ready for this exciting episode. And now, here's your host, Adam Dins.
Friends, welcome back to the SpiritWoke Podcast. Today we welcome Elen to the show. Elen reached out to us a few weeks ago to share her personal story of awakening and various spiritual abilities. And my friends, tonight is the first time that Elen is sharing her story with the world, and I can't wait for you to hear it. So, Elen, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
It is an honor to have you, and I've been really excited to record this episode because, you know, we haven't had someone on the show who hasn't shared their story before, and I'm looking forward to you sharing with our audience here. You know, and maybe that's a good place to start. You know, before we talk about your spiritual awakening, what's caused you to feel the urge to kind of share your experiences with the mass public?
I'm just kind of picking up, I guess, what we call collective consciousness. And so I'm receiving messages to join and participate in just sharing both my personal story and as well as, you know, the information or the messages that I've received that are really for the collective. The things that I've learned and understand on a soul level really are gifts that are meant for everybody and truths that are meant for everybody. And so I'm being very, very much guided at this time to get out and openly share my story and just join in the many others that are coming out and openly sharing their information as far as what they've experienced in their awakening as well.
That is fantastic, and we're all going to be the better for it. So major kudos to you. I know how it's not always easy to come out and share your story. So well, wonderful. Well, one more thing before we get into the questions is I want to let everyone here know that Elen and I are going to be recording a few podcast episodes together over the next weeks or few weeks, and we're going to be releasing them as sort of episodic content, so a series, if you will. So we're going to have today is going to be just a more of a broad overview of Elen's awakening experience and some of the things that she's experienced since then, and then we're going to take some deep dives into some really interesting topics. So in future podcasts, so stand by for that. That's going to be really cool. So, Elen, why don't we tell our listeners a little bit about your awakening experience, maybe what sparked it, and we're all ears. We want to hear your story.
Okay. Well, I wish I could say that there was one major event that happened that caused it, but there was and there wasn't at the same time. I kind of had a really profound spiritual awareness right from my early ages. I drowned when I was a 4-year-old. And so I had a near-death experience as a really young kid. And it was like I did go to heaven, like you hear others talk about. And it just kind of set me on that path in my life. And then throughout my journey, I've had so many profound experiences. Now I know they're profound. At the time I just didn't understand what I was perceiving or experiencing, of course. But over the years, I've just really started to realize that it was little crumbs being given to me. Well, and not some of them weren't little, they were big, but just I was being led all along, as we all are. But I was definitely given some profound experiences right from the beginning of my early childhood. And it just continued to lead me down my path. And then eventually, after many other experiences of both out of body and dreaming things, dreaming things before they happen, prophetic dreams, births, deaths, etc. I ended up having a full-blown crown chakra opening experience, and that would be my one experience, I think, that would determine the awakening, if you want to call it that. So many things along the way led me there. And then eventually I had this one experience that was like a full download. And I don't know how to describe it other than the top of my head opened up where my crown chakra is. And it was like having a waterfall of information pouring into me. And it was really profound. So
that's incredible. So I have two questions to ask you about that.
Okay.
So first one is about the crown chakra opening and sort of that download that you received. What kind of information was it? Because this, I presume is probably a very intense experience.
Yeah, you've probably heard of others talk about having been given wisdom, right?
Yes.
Have you ever heard anybody say that? So basically, that's what I understand that it was, and it didn't just happen because I was lucky or anything else either. I think that a lot of it, was due to my own spiritual work of forgiving people in my life that had harmed me, and asking for forgiveness myself, and doing all of that spiritual work. It kind of got me to that place, and then when that happened, and that crown chakra opening happened, it was kind of like, so I reached a level of spiritual growth in my own self where I was then granted wisdom. And it didn't come from me, if you will. So it was kind of like once I reached a level of my own growth, my own spiritual, I want to say purity, but I'm by no means an innocent person, But once I reached a level of growth in my own soul, that I was granted that, if you will. And that's what people are talking about when they say they're given wisdom. So when that crown chakra opens and that waterfall pours into your being, you're shown all of the mysteries of the universe, if you will, or I shouldn't even say all, but you're just shown so much. I don't know. A lot of people call it tapping into the akashic records. It's really difficult to describe in human terms, but it's basically like you see things from the eye of God, the all-knowing eye, and you kind of see how humanity's been doing everything wrong compared to where we came from in the spirit world. So it's like we're upside down here on this planet, and you see that. You see that we where we come from, we don't kill each other, and we don't rape little kids, and we don't, hurt people for money, and that type of a thing. And so it's kind of like really overwhelming because you're taking it in and then you're going, oh my gosh, we're doing everything wrong.
Yeah. So that wow, that's incredible. Now, where were you when this happened? Hopefully you weren't driving or anything. Were you in a place where you were able to just sit and receive all of it?
Yeah, I know that spirit always knows where we are and what we're doing, and so those things don't usually happen for us unless we're in a safe place because we're loved also. But I was in my home, and I was doing a lot of praying and meditating and soul searching for several months. I had lost a baby, and I had my heart broken so many times, and I was really just not happy in my life. And I was seeking answers, year after year, doing lots of, just work on myself and trying to be a better person and, things like that. And I had a couple of pretty intense, painful situations happen at that time. And so I was doing some deep soul searching and some praying and asking for forgiveness in my own many blunders. And I had asked for forgiveness, and I had to work on it for maybe a couple of months before this even happened, because I had made a choice in my life that was a repetitive choice, meaning I had made the same mistake more than once, and I had already promised the divine or source or God or, whatever, that I wasn't going to do that again, because I kind of felt that I knew it was wrong, and I did it anyways. And I felt the pain of my own sin, if you want to call it that. I really suffered for what I did, and so I felt like I was doomed. And I got a message from my dad that said, we're not even supposed to be in judgment of our own selves, because we belong to the Creator. And so we can't even judge our own selves, really. And therefore, I had to figure out, I had already gone through forgiving other people, but I had to figure out how I was going to forgive my own self. And that was a really life-altering, spiritually altering change for me that helped me to have that crown chakra opening, where I finally said, okay, that's true. I guess I'm not. Creator knows me even better than I know me, so I'm gonna forgive myself. And that took a lot of work. And I'm going to give myself and my fate to Source. And I had to go through those emotions and those feelings and that process, and just kind of give myself up to Source and dare to face my Creator. Because I think that's where a lot of people get stuck. They think that they're going to go to this hell that they've been taught in all these different belief systems. And so they're so afraid that they're going to be punished for the bad deeds that they've done, because we're human. We all make bad choices sometimes and do things that we know we're not supposed to do. And so on a subconscious level, we're afraid of facing our Maker. And it was only when I finally got the courage to do that I was granted this other awareness.
And so when you say that, the courage to face your Maker, does that mean just to what you were referring to, where you, for years, you just kind of, approached Source and kind of bared your soul and asked for guidance, and is that kind of what you're referring to?
I guess how I could clarify that a little bit more is that in the times past, when I would try to talk to my Creator or to a higher power, whatever you want to call it, I was more passive about it. And in the back of my mind, I was always, unsure and things like that. And so, in this case, I didn't know what Creator is, or, there's love and God are the two most misunderstood things in the world, really. But there was a lot of confusion in my mind, even of what is my source and where do I come from and who am I and things like that. But I always sensed that there was this higher power and this higher all-knowing, or whatever you want to call it. But yeah, in the past, when I would try to reach out or pray or whatever, it was more of a passive prayer. And this time I had suffered so much. I was in so much suffering. I literally heard my heart tear in half. And I couldn't take it anymore. So I was 100% without any doubt in my mind. I was committed to giving my whole soul to this higher power and this Source Creator, and wherever I came from, to do whatever I needed to do to be a good person so that I didn't have to suffer anymore.
Okay.
I 100% gave myself up.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I hear what you're saying. In the past, maybe they were prayers, maybe they were asking for help or whatever, but this time you went to your Creator and really just laid it all on the table.
Yeah, I gave my whole heart, and I think that that's what Source really wants, if you want to call it that. And I know there's a lot of different ways of expressing the way that we perceive Source or whatever, but I call it Source.
Yeah.
And I gave 100%. And I think that was the mistake I had made in the past, where I wasn't getting the answers so much as I hadn't 100% surrendered. So that surrender is pivotal, really.
Yeah, we've had a few guests on our show who have on the SpiritWoke podcast who are all about surrender, and I've been learning about surrender in my own spiritual journey, and I feel like I really like how you touch on that. What does surrender mean to you?
Surrender to me means me letting go of really everything, control of outcomes, earthly desires. It really just means giving my whole heart up to source, letting go of everything I think I want or desire or whatever, and giving my whole self to source in willingness to be guided to whatever source wants of me, as opposed to me wanting it of me. And in the years past, since I've had that awakening, is really, I've learned that surrender is something that we have to do every day, because every day we have our fun little ego that likes to try to lead us in to do what it wants to do. It's a false sense of self, and it leads us into earthly attachments, addictions, and chasing dollars instead of chasing what the soul wants of us, and those type of things, and it leads to our suffering, really. So surrender on a daily basis is something that I try to practice, because it's so easy for me to just go, oh, but I want this, and start trying to chase it. And if it's not something I'm guided on a soul level to do, then I end up hurting my own self.
Yeah, no, that's incredible. There's a really fantastic book called The Surrender Experience. Have you heard of that book?
I have not.
I'm sorry, The Surrender Experiment, not The Surrender Experience. It's by an author who, his name is Michael Singer. He called it Mickey Singer. He's written quite a few books, and he's a brilliant writer. But the net of it is he started practicing in his life back in I think it was in the 70s or the 60s even. His whole goal was, essentially, the story started out where he was sitting with his brother-in-law at a dinner table, and he says to his brother-in-law, it was an awkward silence, right? You know, that awkward silence when you're just kind of sitting there and just don't know what to say. And Singer says to his brother-in-law, "You ever hear that voice inside of your head?" And his brother-in-law says, "Yeah." And Singer says, "Where do you think that comes from? What is that?" And his brother-in-law is like, "I don't know." And so Singer essentially goes on this journey after that, and this is his autobiography, of trying to figure out what that voice is, where it comes from. And in the process, he starts going through this thing where he surrenders to everything. He surrenders, and he's a yogi by nature, or by trade. You know, he's a big time yogi, big meditator. He bought a van. He moved out to the middle of nowhere and just started meditating and doing yoga for
Nice.
And so but the whole point of the book was sort of surrendering to the way, meaning like he ended up becoming a very successful CEO and worked directly with WebMD. As a matter of fact, it was part of his company. And he became a multimillionaire over again. But the whole story was that he didn't do anything. Like, let me say that differently. He surrendered to life and kind of followed what spirit opened up to him instead of trying to forge his own way.
Exactly. That's exactly what it is, really. And by the way, it took me having failed everything else that I ever tried before to get me humble enough to be on my knees asking for help, because I failed at everything. I failed my family. I failed with children. I failed with relationships. I went to college and didn't get the job that I wanted. I was screwing everything up. And it took a lot for me to crack, because I was a stubborn mule. I was strong in myself. I felt like I could do all these things if I put my mind to it and all that. But I neglected to ask for the higher power. And so it took me a lot of suffering to get to that point where I finally was humbled enough to say, wait a second, I see now that I have screwed everything up by not listening to spirit. And so in the moment that I made that choice and I got on my knees and I 100% did that surrender thing, then I started being shown the way. And that's the pivotal moment, really, for any soldier in this journey, is to get to that point where you're willing to open yourself to realizing that maybe there is a higher power, because I know a lot of people are unsure. And then when you open yourself to that and you start to really pay attention, you start seeing the signs, and it's kind of like, oh, well, maybe I'm just going to keep experimenting with this and see where it leads me. In my case, I was experimenting along the way, and I was, sure that there was a higher power, but it wasn't the same thing as having a full-blown third eye chakra crown opening awakening.
Yeah.
that sort of just took the cake, and that left me with zero doubt.
Yeah, and I think there's probably a lot of people who listen to this podcast that haven't had that experience, sort of that mystical experience, and are sort of trying to not figure out, but and you and I talked a little bit about this, on a call last week, but a lot of us grew up in a religion or in a certain construct, dogma, if you will, and there's a certain archetype of God that we believed in,
yes.
And so when we go through this spiritual awakening, however it is, I always share with my friends that my spiritual awakening came from a meeting with a medium who was able to connect with my dad, who had crossed over, and I blew my mind. I had no idea that wasn't part of my religious construct, and so it's like, okay, well now there's all this other stuff that I didn't know is there, and so what is it, and how do I even begin to wrap my head around what this is,
Yeah, that kind of happened to me too when I told you that I drowned as a small child, because I also grew up in a religious background. And when I was young and drowned and went to the other side, I perceived on a deep soul level that I had reincarnated many times, and I just understood it somehow. And when I would talk about that with my family, I was very much rejected, and that idea was very much rejected. So it left me very confused and torn and fragmented in my journey. And so I would say to anybody that's unsure, or they haven't reached a place of absolute third eye opening type thing, which is basically where you sort of come face to face with your maker, if you will, right? But I would say if they're on their journey and they're really unsure about that they don't come from a creator that is going to hate them or be angry with them or upset with them in any way for asking questions. We were taught by the great Master Christ to ask and ye shall receive, right? And I find also that a lot of people confuse that asking with doubt. So instead of asking, they automatically go to doubt. And they go, I don't know, I haven't seen it, so I don't know. I highly doubt that a God could put me on this earth and let me lose my kids and let me, lose everything I've got and suffer and everything. They just go right to doubt instead of saying, okay, look, I don't know this is what I did. I literally said this to Source. I don't care if you're a purple alligator. I don't care what you are. I don't care what you look like. Just show me, because I can't continue on like I am right now. Like I suffered too much, and I don't want to continue that way. So I don't care what you look like or what you are, but show yourself to me. And I was really serious about it, and so it was revealed to me, if you will, or I was given wisdom, or whatever you want to call it. So I would just say, don't doubt, just allow yourself to ask, and then be open to receiving. And if you don't get the answer right away, we'll keep working on it, because sometimes we don't get the answers given to us right when we ask for them, because our heart's not quite ready yet. And we do have to, the Egyptian teachings are that your heart has to be as light as a feather. So you do kind of have to get your heart cleaned up first before you get to be shown certain mysteries for the sacredness of our souls, basically. So, yeah,
that makes that's deep. That's deep, Ellen. Question for you. So I feel like, you and others whom I've talked to that have had these really deep, powerful experiences, most all of them have gone through something so painful and so traumatic, and oftentimes multiple incidents.
Right.
And eventually that just kind of like, sort of opens them up to this type of communication with source. And so my question, and I'm sure there are people who are listening to the podcast wondering the same thing, where they haven't experienced that kind of trauma, or suffering. And, maybe life hasn't been so hard on them. I mean, obviously, they've experienced some things that are hard. No one goes through life, unscathed and unscarred, but, there's definitely there's levels of that. But, how does someone who hasn't been through something that, say, like you've been through, some kind of heavy trauma that kind of brings them to their knees, right? Because it's almost like rock bottom in a lot of ways, right?
Yeah.
So how does someone who doesn't get to rock bottom get to a place where they're able to kind of crack that shell around their heart?
Well, that's a really good question. I'm not even sure that I have the answer for that, other than, that it's a tough question. I do know this much. If your soul's meant to have an awakening, it's going to. And if it's not meant to, you're not going to. And I know that not everybody in this lifetime is meant to. It would be so chaotic if everybody went through an awakening all at the same time, because, you kind of lose your mind and you go through all sorts of stuff. I mean, you see a lot of people in the spiritual community that are going through awakenings, and a lot of them become homeless for a while. The journey is really tough because they have to go through and sift and sort so much and transcend so much, that if everybody did it at once, this world would be in chaos. So I know there's divine order and divine, plan in that regard. And I think that if it's somebody who's really not in a state of suffering and they want to have an awakening, or they, or it's meant for them, they can still access the truth just literally by living a life of Christ consciousness, or following the footsteps of Christ. I like to call it, because you're becoming an embodiment of Christ. That's what Christ consciousness is. You are becoming Christ-like in your own self. So anybody, even if they haven't had a lot of challenges in their life, they're still human. So they're still probably walking around, subconsciously judging people or whatever it is. And if they want to be a better person, or they really want to tap into their spiritual truth, they can access it too through just walking in those footsteps, if you will. And of course, meditation is obviously so important.
Absolutely.
And I would say too that if it doesn't matter who the person is, if they really want to try to have these higher dimensional experiences, to really practice meditation, and especially practice the type of meditation where you silence the mind, because that's how wisdom comes in, is for that mind to become thoughtless.
Yeah. Yeah, that's powerful. And hearing you say that too, it reminds me that, there are different kinds of awakenings that people go through. There's the awakening where, that Eckhart Tolle talks a lot about, where you sort of realize that, you have thoughts, but you're not your thoughts. You're this eternal soul, and that, that there's this inner part of you. So I love the way he refers to it as, we're human beings, we're part human, we're part being. And when we start to become aware of the being part of our human being, and we see the difference, and we can, start relating to that inner self, and we start to recognize the ego when it begins to, chime in and react, to his point. And I love the way he says it, but, once you become aware of your ego, you're awakened, and you can never go back.
Right.
And so there's so much freedom to that too, when you're able to start to experience those types of things, and you start looking at the world and the universe completely differently. And it doesn't always require, a crown chakra opening, but,
right.
And so it's important for those folks who are listening in right now who haven't experienced the types of things that Elen has, that don't doubt your awakening.
I'm glad that you brought that up, actually, because when I mentioned that I had been doing several months of soul searching, one of the things that I was doing was learning about that ego. So that is huge in the process of any soul trying to, tap into their spiritual nature or feel more fulfilled on a spiritual level, is to really start to recognize your own ego. All of us have one, so it doesn't matter what your experiences are. You still have it. You still have ego. So you can, once you learn it, you were right. That was absolutely perfect.
Yeah, and I love your point too, that not everyone before we come here for each lifetime, we have a soul contract that we that we sign essentially, where we're going to come back and we're going to live a life, and here's the lessons that our soul needs to learn. And we may not be in a lifetime where that was part of the contract, right? Like we may be here, to learn patience, or to learn how to love, or to, overcome certain fears that we've had, or even, certain, if we were hateful and we need to learn to not be hateful, whatever those things are, right? And so not everything means that we're going to have this experience like you've had. So.
And some souls, some souls come literally only for a few short years just to bring a message or to assist in a lesson for another soul. So you'll see people who lose their children at a young age, and they're so devastated by it, they immediately tend to reject God and things like that. But if they could see things from a higher perspective, or from that other side, if you want to call it the flip side, I like to call it, but the non-physical realm, then they would see that those souls are still in existence, right? Just like you were saying with your dad, and that there's a bigger picture. So sometimes we have to kind of step back a little bit to allow space for a higher knowing. And sometimes we have to kind of sit in the wound for a while until we've grieved long enough to be able to step away, so that we can see it from that perspective.
Yeah, I love kind of how you and you said it a little bit earlier, and I'll just paraphrase, but it's like there is that part of us that feels safe, like we feel safe in our lives. And I'm speaking, I'm just being honest and speaking about myself here, right? Like have a job, have a home, have a car, so on and so forth. And there's also the spiritual side of me, right, where it's like I'm also a Reiki practitioner, and I love meditation, and I all this other stuff, but I haven't been brought to a point to where and I when I meditate, I sort of allude to this, but I don't know how ready I would be to even go through something like you went through. You know what I mean? Like it's like, people say, I want to experience this, and I want to, have this and have that from a spiritual perspective. But if you truly ask them, are you willing to give up these comforts that you have? How many of us would be willing to do that?
Right. Yeah, I agree. The twin flame journey is a lot like that. I see a lot of people out there, asking for their twin and not understanding like the level of deep, profound, I want to say suffering, but it's really not a suffering thing. It's just that it catapults you into having to clear out a lot of the suffering that's already been going on in your soul. And you're right. Not a lot of people are prepared yet for that kind of commitment in any of the spiritual lessons, because it takes a lot to go through forgiveness, and to go through healing, and to go through really, really deep lessons of self-love, because you have to dig into the core of your being. And if we really want to go deep, which I don't know how to do anything different, then we really have to dig into our souls on a level of past lives.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of remnants and gunk in our souls that are left behind from other lives that we never healed from, which is why we've been in this karmic cycle. And so the work isn't easy.
Yeah, I'd love to echo that. What Ellen just said. I had a past life regression done for me maybe 6-7 months ago, and I believed in reincarnation, but it's one of those things, like, you believe in something versus something because you've experienced it, right? It's kind of like, I went to college and I learned about this versus I'm doing it for a career now, so I know how it works, right? I know how to do it as a profession. But I went through a past life regression through hypnotherapy where, it was one of the most mind-blowing experiences of my life to sort of see myself. And when I say see myself, I wasn't staring at myself. I didn't, it wasn't like I was watching from a third party perspective. It was me, first person in this life, seeing these things that were so incredible, and at the end of the life, I witnessed my passing, and I popped out of my body and at the end of the regression, and I was hovering over my body. And at that moment, the lesson hit me of that life. When I was floating above, the lesson hit me, and I knew exactly. And I started to cry. I was in the chair and I started to cry. And the reason I think I was crying was because I'm still struggling in this lifetime with what I struggled with in that lifetime, even though I learned the lesson, in that past life, or going through that past life regression. It's like you can see it and you can experience it. And so it was beautiful, because now I don't just believe in past lives. I in reincarnation, I 100% know it. But at the same time, it's like, it's amazing how strong the karmic cycle is, because you can even see it and learn it, and then be like, but I'm having such a hard time changing it here. Why am I having such a hard time changing it?
You're so right. The patterning gets so deeply embedded into your soul energy that it's sort of like an anchor that holds you into the earth realm, so you can't move on until you've completely healed through it. And that's why the work is so challenging and so difficult. And thank goodness that you had that experience, and thank goodness for really everybody that's having these experiences and helping, us to become aware, not to disregard our own spiritual knowing and our own feelings and our own senses. Because I think that's where we're at now as a collective, is that we are in this time where we're openly, and that's why I felt it was so important for me to even come out openly and just talk about it, because when I was growing up, it really wasn't something that you walk around and talk about, the fact that you've had past lives and you've talked to ghosts and, all these things. But we are at a place now where a lot of people are coming out. And I think this is so pivotal for us. This is the mass awakening. And it's so important that we all, come out and really recognize the way we feel and start talking about it to each other. It's awesome. It's such a great time to be a part of this world right now.
It really is. And when you shared that you wanted to kind of, to paraphrase or to put in quotes, come out on the show and on the podcast and share your story, for those who are listening who haven't, shared their story with others, if you haven't shared your story, if you're kind of keeping this all inside, and we've all been there, because it's not comfortable. You experience this thing and it's weird, right? Like I learned shortly after going through this that this stuff is weird. It's not, it's not the everyday norm. And so when you come out and you start talking about it, it can be a very vulnerable thing to do. But two things, and I'd love to hear your take on this, Ellen. Two things I've learned is, number one, resisting opening up about it is going to cause internal turmoil inside of you. And it's going to, you're going to get frustrated because all this amazing stuff is happening to you and you just can't talk to anybody about it. And when you do eventually do it, it's the most liberating feeling. And because when you do come out, if you will, and you gain that freedom, and you're no longer worried or concerned about what anybody else is going to think about you, it's just like the most freeing thing you'll feel. So that's point one. Point two is, if you don't do it on your own, you can't hide anything. You can hide things for so long, but eventually the universe is going to orchestrate something where you can't keep it quiet anymore. And so you might as well just take it and let it roll and just surrender to it.
Yeah, surrender, good word. I totally agree with you. And I think we have to remember that in our generations past, where we have failed our own selves, and speaking of karmic cycles, we've been karmically cycled round and round, partially due to the fact that we have generation upon generation of burning witches and putting people in mental institutions for talking to themselves, and all kinds of traumas to the souls. Generation after generation for having spiritual awareness really is what it is. And it's been misdiagnosed, and it's been misjudged, and it's been kept secret, and it's been, there have been attempts to keep us away from our own truth, our own spiritual truths, that is part of our cycles of karma that we have to break now if we want to evolve. Yeah. So coming out in the open is not only doing a service to our own soul, but it's doing a service to humanity, because we have to stop crucifying people for being the very souls that they were designed to be. It's baffling really that it's taken this long for us to realize and recognize that this is our spiritual nature, to have dreams that come true, and to be able to hear thoughts, and to have telepathy and those kind of things. It is our spiritual nature. It truly is. And we've been slaughtered and genocided for it for thousands of years. And so I feel like that was, for me, that's part of why I needed to come out my own self and be willing to just openly talk about this, because whatever's gone on in my own past lives, I've only tapped into a few of them, and a few specks of them here and there, but I can only imagine, for all of us, what we've been through. And we collectively have to kind of break this cycle as well. Yeah. That's what we're here to do, right?
Yeah, so true. Yeah. So Ellen, next time she's on the podcast, we're going to talk about out-of-body experiences and astral traveling and the astral plane and all that cool stuff. So we're going to save talking about, Ellen, your childhood experience where you drowned and crossed over, because we want to get into that in our next podcast conversation. But okay. I do want to end with this question because I think it's really fascinating. When you and I were talking a little bit before recording, you mentioned, you've always kind of had these various spiritual abilities, and I think they happened after your near-death experience. These psychic abilities, and so I'd love to, if you wouldn't mind sharing with our audience, what were those different abilities that you found, and how have they kind of matured over the years? What have they evolved into?
Okay. The biggest one for me that I've always I just don't know life any other way, is that I've always been able to dream things and be able to interpret my dreams. So when I have a dream, I was always able to connect what it meant on the physical plane from the spiritual plane. So I just somehow had this knowing that I was being guided through dreams, dreaming births, deaths, and events, and things like that before they happen. So prophetic dreams, I guess you would call it. But that was probably the biggest gift, or I must have developed it real early on, or maybe I had a past life where I really got good at it. I don't know, but I really understood the dream thing. And so that has guided me so much in my life. I have been able to, have it knowing that people were going to be being born and who they were and what my role was going to be like in their life, and get given strong messages that I needed to help raise this child or whatever it was, as well as knowing that somebody was going to be crossing over. Even my grandmother came to me in the dream state and asked me to help her find her way back. So I helped her to get through the astral realms. And then, of course, when I woke up, sure enough, she did pass that night. But that's been one thing that's been super, for me, I've been really lucky to just have that understanding. And then over time, and of course I doubted it a lot when I was younger, but I've gotten to the point where I don't doubt myself and my guidance anymore. But over time, I've also kind of definitely learned how to develop telepathy. And I guess it with certain people as well, but telepathy, I've developed that, as well as just hearing thoughts and recognizing, negative entities around me that aren't supposed to be there. I mean, I guess I could say positive and negative because there's both. Sure. But it becomes more noticeable when it's something that's negative. We sort of almost disregard the good all the time, don't we? Yeah. Which is why we need to work on our gratitude attitude. But yeah, just definitely recognizing, like, I can have somebody touch me and I get an imprint of what their life path has been like and the things that they've done. And I think we talked about that on the phone once. I had somebody grab my arm and I could see, I had like I could see his life and some of the deeds that he did in his life. And I knew that he had raped a couple of girls, and I burned in my arm where he touched me for hours, like a black, oily, burning sensation that felt like a cancerous oil. And it took a long time for me to kind of work that out of my arm. So that's just a couple of them off the top of my head. I've come out of body several times. I've had near-death experiences a few times and come out of body through meditation as well. I don't know. There's a lot now. Remote viewing, remote surgeries. I think we wrote a kind of a list to try to touch on, and I could go on and on and on about them. So I don't want to take your whole time here, but yeah. Am I covering everything that we wrote? Because
you sure are, because I just wanted to give the audience a little bit of a taste for what we've got coming up, because I think I think it's just, and not because of the mystical nature of it all, but I just think it really adds to the conversation about what really is out there. And when I say out there, I also mean in there and all around us. We see this right. We see this three-dimensional earth form that we're on, and we see our bodies every day, and we see our pets, and we see our cars and our office space, and that to us is reality. But there's so much more than that, and I'm really excited, Ellen, for our future episodes where we can really dive into some of these topics and get people really excited about all that is, to pardon the pun on that one.
Yeah, that's super awesome. And I wouldn't mind just kind of closing by saying that as much as there's a lot of, for all of us, really, there's a lot of struggles that we go through and things like that. But in the end of the day, everything really is for our own, for the love of each one of us. We are so loved. And it's hard, it's hard to see that sometimes, but that is the truth. And so everything that we go through all along the way really is for our own good. And if we can just keep our hearts in a good place and stay pure in the heart and stay open to learning whatever it is that we're supposed to learn from that experience, we'll see that the universe is embracing us with love every step of the way. So it's not a scary, horrible thing or whatever. It is a beautiful thing all along the way. Even through the pain, sometimes there's so much beauty to be seen, when we can back away from it long enough to just see what's going on. It's just breathtakingly beautiful.
It's so spot on what you just, I have nothing else to add to that. So I'm just going to let that sit in your minds, those who are listening in. So ponder that. Ellen, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thank you so much for having me. Sorry about that.
Oh, no. The pleasure and the honor is all on this side of the microphone.
No, it's a mutual thing. That's what makes it wonderful.
Absolutely. So until next time, friends, take care of yourselves and each other, and we'll see you next time on the SpiritWoke Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the SpiritWoke Podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave us a review on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to check out our website, spiritwoke.com, and connect with the SpiritWoke community on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Just search SpiritWoke. Join us next time for another edition of the SpiritWoke Podcast. Namaste.